Whew. The person who messaged us did so upon the recommendation of a friend of ours, basically to say that they felt that they were being physically and sexually assaulted by a spirit, and that this had happened several times, and that upon inquiring in other groups of people, they found that they were not the only person to experience this where they are currently staying. Did I manage to leave all salient details
I think
out?
so. That this is a known location of violent spiritual activity.
This is not the first time that someone has come to us and said, a spirit is either physically assaulting me and or physically sexually assaulting me. Whether there's a sexual element or not, there's this element of violence. Now, I am not attempting to gaslight anybody or in any way invalidate anyone's perspective on things. But my first recommendation, always, 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 is horses, not zebras. So start by setting up a motion capture camera. Start by seeing a qualified mental health professional, of which Ian and I, we're pastoral counselors. That's not the same thing. To see if there is a chance that and I know this is terrifying, but it does happen, someone is drugging you and hurting you, and you are perceiving that as a sexual situation. No.
As a spiritual.
As a spiritual sexual situation.
As a spiritual sexual assault rather than a
physical
terrestrial sexual assault.
Thank you. I'm like, no, they are being assaulted. Right. That's not in question here.
The question is whether it's coming from an embodied spirit or a disembodied spirit.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
As well, look into, talk with a qualified mental health professional, although, depending on the nature of it, the mental health professional, so there are a couple of mental health diagnoses that basically say, person's brain makes them experience this thing. Moving on. And it's like, okay, great, you just said that my brain is making me experience this thing, but you don't have a mechanism, you don't have a why, you just decided to slap a label on it that denies the possibility that there actually is a spirit assaulting me
in my
sleep.
Unfortunately, it really depends on the quality of mental health provider you find, and if you live in the United States, that can be questionable. I still think it's worth recommending, and I think it's worth trying, because if it turns out that what's happening is that you're remembering something that occurred to you, or allowing yourself to acknowledge something occurred to you at one point in your history, it is good to have a mental health professional help you through that. However, that being said, as this person is not the only person experiencing this in this sleeping environment, and not the only person who has gone through it in that space.
And also not the only person who has asked us a question like this.
I'm going to go ahead and basically say, all right, so assuming that you don't find something on the camera that shows that a person is drugging you or using light therapy to put you into a hypnosis state, I don't know.
Presupposing that you have taken sort of screening steps and that for the purposes of this answer, they have not found anything. So we can assume that you are looking at some form of spiritual assault. Then let's talk about what some steps are that you can take.
Okay, cool. Everybody clear?
Yeah, for the purposes of this answer, we're ruling out non-spiritual possibilities because we're assuming that someone has already taken steps to rule out the more common ones.
Right, so for the purpose of the rest of this class, we are assuming it is not horses, it's zebras. Cool. All right. So to start with, there is a really big divide in the witchcraft community as to whether or not the tools you use matter and have some degree of intrinsic power on their own.
Yeah, I have gotten into this argument a number of times, or variations thereon.
Whether it's all about your power and your focus and your intentions. Like most things, I fall somewhere in the middle. I think that tools that we use do have an intrinsic power simply because there are many schools of witchcraft that it's just about the tools. You don't have to do any kind of meditation or focus or intentional sending of energy.
Like, not really. You put this stuff together, you do this thing, the thing happens.
Right. Then there are schools of witchcraft, and to this one I primarily belong, where it's like, well, yeah, you can throw all the correct ingredients together, and if you don't call upon a power, whether that's your power plus something else, or just something else, you've created so much dangerous soup. And then I also do a fair amount of work where I don't use any tools at all. So I kind of slide back and forth on this line, and I don't think that any perspective is necessarily invalid. So for the course of this, my answer is going to cover several things you can try along this spectrum, and my recommendations thereof. I believe you said you wanted to do something somewhat similar?
Yeah, so I fall at 3 distinct points on this spectrum, simultaneously. The first of which is, and this is what I primarily do when I'm doing workings myself, is tools are irrelevant, you don't need them, you can do everything you need to with shape, focused intention, and energy, and or information. Which I do believe. I don't think that you need them. I also, simultaneously, believe that you can use a tool as a conduit by which to shape and or channel energy. And depending on everything from collective unconscious eclipse associated with that tool, to your personal associations with that tool, to the way that it bends energy, because everything bends energy in some way, right?
Sometimes to burn your house down.
Right.
Sorry, my crystal ball is not covered, and people were like, well, aren't you concerned about spirits? And I was like, honestly, I'm more concerned with the fact that I'm not sure if light's gonna bounce around in it and light my house on fire.
Although having said that, we may want to cover it.
Yes.
And the third position that I have on this is well, sure, your porch is the right color blue, that's all you need.
Right, like paint blue relies on the fact that you painted it blue.
And I think that for a variety of reasons, which I can sum up in very brief as enough people believe that it works that way, that even if it didn't before, it does now. Then there are definitely circumstances where all you need is the thing. So 3 different points on that spectrum simultaneously.
So starting, for those of you who are patrons and you do watch our classes on subversive, harmful, and malicious spirits, I do have another one of those that I need to get posted. We talked a little bit about the various methods that have been used to repel them over the many, many years. And now we're going culture by culture by culture, starting in Sumer, with how the subversive, harmful, and malicious spirits behave, and the methods used to repel, banish, or in some way defeat, destroy, contain them. I don't have time in the course of an Ask a Witch class to cover every culture in the world in terms of tools. So I'm going to run through sort of basic categories of how the tools work.
Right.
So there are tools that contain. They trap, they lock in place, they in some way force a spirit to go through repetitive series of behaviors that the spirit will never escape from. There are tools that repel. So basically, a spirit will not approach you or attempt to harm you when you have these tools present. And there are tools which defend. So something that will fight on your behalf and protect you. And there are tools that you use like to that basically focus your ability to hurt it yourself.
Yeah. Fireplace poker.
Fireplace poker. That was actually one of my examples. Okay, so we're gonna start with contain.
My personal favorite, I have a labyrinth hanging in the front hallway.
Yes, Ian likes the labyrinth. You find this idea of trapping spirits in labyrinths everywhere from the Hellenics to the Chinese.
Yeah.
It was very, very common. It still is in some areas of the world, where you put labyrinths on things, and the idea is that the spirit gets trapped in the labyrinth. Now, whether or not you have to bless the labyrinth or charge the labyrinth,
that varies by culture.
Yeah, I will get into my method of charging tools through the course of this. Additionally, there are things like spirit traps, which are certain shaped crystals that are believed to possess a spirit. Basically, a spirit trap is an uneven crystal that terminates at both ends.
Yeah.
So it's not perfectly four-sided. It's supposed to be like...
It is a double terminated crystalline structure with a symmetrical formation.
Thank you. Your translation is appreciated. There are spirit trap jars where essentially if a spirit attempts to harm you, they get sucked into the jar and then they can't get out.
Mirrors?
There are mirrors. I used to use mirrors a lot in my spirit working, but what I used to use is getting increasingly harder to find and increasingly more expensive, which are antique silver compacts.
Yeah. Because you got a mirror encased in silver.
Yes, and then I can
and
flip
then you can
it.
close it, and then you've got something in a mirror encased in silver, and you can take it and get rid of it later.
I had one teacher who liked to use matrix stones as spirit traps, which are essentially anytime a stone that is naturally full of holes gets something like opal forming inside of it. It's common to see opalized granite, for example,
blizzard stone.
Right, sometimes called a blizzard stone. And boulder opal is a good example of this, where it's literally opal formed in the matrix of a rock. She liked to use those because they were both the crystalline form of a spirit trap, irregular crystal formation, and a natural object, and also
somewhat labyrinthian?
Somewhat labyrinthian. So traps. Here's an old school method of trapping. You literally scatter seeds.
I was gonna say grains of rice.
Seeds, grains of rice, something like that, underneath your bed. And the idea is that when the spirit comes to assault you, they have to count every single seed, and they never end up actually assaulting you. Now, why incubi and succubi and vampires are said to be compelled to count seeds?
Leprechauns. Old school leprechauns.
Right, old school leprechauns. I don't know. But I do know that that's why the count counts. It's a double pun. So, right, moving right along. Contain. Repel. I tend to use a lot of repelling techniques. Wards and boundaries and shields and tools that keep things at bay.
Right, if you're looking at tools or objects, this ranges from
a garland of chili peppers and garlic
to wild roses by the side of your door to a crucifix.
In particular, in Eastern European lore that a lot of what I do is rooted in, then wild rose thorns are very useful. I actually tend to put them in the containment jars where things get sucked into them. I put wild rose thorns, and I'm talking wild rose thorns. They're huge. They're mean, and they're covered in irritant. There's also
blessing the cornerstone.
Yeah, blessing the cornerstone. Although if you don't own your home or know where it is, that one can be harder. There's hanging up spirit repelling cards and painting symbols on your walls. There's so many different repelling things, but they tend to be either herbs that you burn that smell foul and pungent, fumitory, asafoetida, sulfur, and things that you hang up that again have a strong aroma and are associated not just with protection, but if you are in the atheist circle, they're associated with repelling insects.
Right, and or antimicrobial in general.
Yeah, so insects, rats, things like that.
Other note with things to repel is that as you study what gets referred to as demonology,
for lack of a better
term, you will find that a lot of specific spirits or specific classes of spirits have specific things that will repel them, which means that if you go, okay, this assault checks these 4 boxes, then I should do this thing to repel that specific class of spirit.
Right. Like the Sumerians would create carved symbols that would be mounted on beds or worn as bracelets or necklaces that were said to repel certain spirits. And that's one of the oldest civilizations in the world, that you use this very specific thing for this specific class of spirits. Right.
That's where the trips to the old leather-bound tomes that we all wish we had shelves of happen. Or you can Google.
We're going to come back to the creation of wards and barriers in the more purely energetic stuff. We're still on tools.
Although we can talk about things like brick dust.
Right. Laying down a circle of brick dust, laying down a circle of salt, laying down, which has the additional benefit for those of you who are still looking for horses, in that if you lay down a fine powder all over your floor, and then there are actually footprints,
then that's a pretty strong indicator that
something
is
walking in your room. So, right, where was I? There are barriers made of physical substances. It's one of the reasons to keep a mirror by your bedside in some cultures is to repel things. That always worked backwards for me, though.
Yeah.
That always worked backwards.
Is a mirror a repulsive force or a gateway?
Right? I think it depends on what you think they are. And unfortunately, I was pretty solidly on they're a gateway before anybody was like, oh, but you can use it to repel things. Yes. Yes, you can. They can reflect and refract.
Right. My take on this for the curious is, yeah, I know it's a gateway. That's why I made it so that anything coming in gets sucked through it.
You're a master over here. Okay, so moving into the forces that you can ask to protect you.
Yes.
So this can be things like the cross that Ian mentioned, or a symbol of a god, or divine power, or right. In Sumer, again, it was not uncommon for Lamashtu to be banished by summoning Pazuzu, which, if you know how much they feared Pazuzu, that tells you how badly they were frightened of Lamashtu.
There's a drawback to that strategy.
But essentially something that you can summon or ask for protection or guardianship over you, which can even involve the making of a guardian. Or the contracting with one, like we've been talking about in our other classes. But the making of a guardian, the making of a guardian servitor can be, making a little person out of mandrake and saying, little person, you are supposed to protect me from this thing.
Do you have your place enough for me to go on a side rant, by the way?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let me talk about servitors for a second. Everyone who's ever asked me if servitors are unique to chaos magic, no, 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 no. The idea that you create an energetic or ethereal construct to serve a purpose
And you find that in the Hebrew,
so
you
incredibly
find that in
not
the...
unique to chaos magic.
Yeah.
Now, the particular methodology used in chaos magic is not actually unique to chaos magic either. Because it turns out that the idea of speaking life into something and using words to define its purpose is not original.
It's actually found in a lot of different cultures,
Like,
speaking things into being.
Let's start with the Hebrew and
Right.
go from there.
Right, let's look in Ireland where comedians weren't allowed to get married.
Let's look at Southern folk magic, where you tell something its name and tell it its job. So no, servitors are not just a chaos magic thing, and chaos magicians trying to claim that they are full of shit and haven't studied broadly.
Ooh, sorry, my laugh turned into a yawn. I'm very tired.
Sorry.
It's okay. So, whether you summon a guardian or you ask a divine power of some kind to protect you, you can ask for something to fight this battle for you.
I'm also going to add a note on that. If you're asking for intercession from another power, in many cases, there is a power that whatever is messing with you answers to, and you can make a deal with that power to make it go away.
I have definitely summoned the boss of things before
Yeah.
to be like, do you know what your subordinate is getting up to?
Right. This ranges from, the hierarchy of demons in hardcore Solomonic magic to how you can deal with a no kitsune in Japanese folk magic, where you want to ask an Origami for help. Nicely. With offerings.
Yeah.
Um,
Or even so you hang certain Oni masks in your house, and those Oni masks
Will
eat other
Oni.
Oni.
Yeah.
That's not Japanese, that's Chinese.
but
But
relevant nonetheless.
like,
So
the authority isn't always necessarily on your side or a good guy.
but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist and doesn't have rules that it follows.
Right. Also, you don't, just because you're a bad guy doesn't mean you have to be a bad guy. Really, sorry.
That was a fun scene.
So, guardian thing, or a tool that you use that bolsters your own power in defending yourself. That can be, so many people use different things.
Right.
Crystal grids and fireplace pokers and keeping a dagger under your pillow. I did that one for years. I kept an iron dagger. I actually still have it. It's on the shelf in the workroom. I kept an iron dagger underneath my pillow, and then if I felt like something was assaulting me in my sleep, I would cut it with the iron.
Actually, iron is just good in general.
Yeah, iron is great in general. That one, it actually got so bad with this one thing for a while there that I kept a dish of a particular earth by the bed, an iron dish. I think the iron dish is also in the wardrobe. And then one day, scooped it with the knife and shoved it into the earth and clapped the dish shut and was like, never again.
Fuck you.
Fuck you.
I'm gonna go sleep now.
They ruined so much clothes.
Moving on.
Anyway.
But these items that you use to empower yourself are often tradition specific. And they are often individual specific.
Something that makes me feel powerful and safe doesn't necessarily make Ian feel powerful and safe. Although he's been very understanding about everything from knives under my pillow to the fact that I still sleep with the stuffed animal that I was given when I was brought into my great grandmother's home. Still upstairs on my bed. I would consider something like a protective quilt There are certain patterns that are considered
Yeah,
protective
let's talk about the
against
Pennsylvania Dutch and the-
spirits. The pattern itself is said to be what protects you or traps them, or
Right, it's a lot like a sigil in that the pattern has meaning, and the meaning of the pattern is to protect. And so when you make something with that pattern that has that meaning, it does that thing.
And I don't know whether that would be considered a trap or a shield, something to repel it, or something that empowers you.
Somewhere in between.
Somewhere in there. We sleep under one. It's silk. We've had it for several years now, and that helped a lot with my nightmares anyway. Also, it's really warm, which is good because it is 19 degrees Fahrenheit outside right now.
If only I had a working heat upstairs.
Okay, so in the middle of this, we talked about the perspective that there is some element of your power plus the tool. That there's a school of thought that you have to have some element of both. I don't want to use the word have to, but I will say that it has been far easier to banish spirits that are assaulting me in some fashion if the part of me that's like, no, fuck you, asshole, wakes up a little bit and defends me. There is a part of me that is really aggressive. Really aggressive. And does not like being pushed around, and does not like being taken advantage of, and does not like things trying to hurt me. And when I can get it to respond rather than be paralyzed with fear, all of this goes much better. So I spend time when I'm dealing with a harmful or subversive or malicious spirit of some kind, getting myself into the proper attitude to have that attitude. And I'm not saying you have to have it to make use of those tools. In many schools of magic, you don't. But I have found that it has helped me.
In particular, okay, so the other category we wanted to get into, the other broad category, is sort of actions that you take.
Yeah,
Spells,
purely
rituals, energetic constructs, things like that. The thing that's important to know about these is that in most cases, they're shaped by your will, your intention, your focus, your belief. And that means that being able to control your mindset is very important. In particular, when you're dealing with something that is attacking you and or attacking you sexually, you run into a certain cultural problem.
Yes.
Particularly if female presenting in America.
Female presenting, or if you consider yourself to be female.
Yes. Because in America, if you are female or female presenting, you are taught from a very young age that you need to be afraid of being attacked. And you are discouraged from a certain level of agency, righteous anger, no, fuck you, you can't do this to me.
Yeah, we're taught to be small and timid, to respond with fear, to just let the thing get it over with, to consider it in some way our fault that this has happened to us. Now, I want to pause here and say that all sexual assault survivors are taught this kind of bullshit, and it is not just people who identify as being a woman or who are a woman. Because I'm starting to hate that phrase, you identify as a woman. Trans women just are women. They don't identify as women, they are women.
Yeah, I went for presenter R.
Right. So but I will say that people who are men, whether trans or cis or some non-binary and occasionally identifying as man, tend to more be taught this can never happen to you, it's not possible that it would happen to you, which is awful and traumatizing and terrible and wrong. And people who are women, cis, trans, non-binary, and occasionally identifying as women, or who are interpreted by society to be women, whether they are or not, are constantly being told this is a thing that happens to you because you did something wrong. You are at fault when this happens. You should submit and get it over with while it happens. I'm struggling.
It's okay. But the dominant cultural attitude there is something that is going to have an influence on at least a subconscious level, and that if you can be aware of and combat or reject that underlying cultural norm, essentially, then it is easier.
Not easy, but easier.
To focus your will, intention, energy on making it not the case.
Maybe we need to move the scratching post over to that side.
Having said that, do you want to talk a little bit about sort of things that exist for banishing and or protection that are
Purely energetic. So,
I can start if you want, and it is discombobulated, or you can start either way.
Actually, can I have whiskey?
Sure.
Thank you. My favorite method is the no fuck you bubble. Which basically involves me being like, you know what? I need to sleep, and I am not in the mood, and you are gonna accept my no, or this thing is going to do these horrible things to you. And then I actually sit there and envision and build in my mental landscape all the horrible things that this boundary can do to a spirit. I used to get really creative with this. Where like if you get through the first level, it electrocutes you. If you get to the second layer, it chops you up into little bits. If you get through the third layer, then it like dissolves you in pools of spiritual acid. And I would build these incredibly detailed layered bubble shields in my head. Now, one thing I did learn in doing this is you do have to actually envision a full 360 degree
the sphere
bubble.
instead of the hemisphere?
Yes, it is a bubble because spirits don't care about shit like floors. But I basically would build the no fuck you bubble, which was all the vicious things I wanted to do to things that would commit physical and or sexual assault against me, and surround myself with it and really, really believe in that bubble and thoroughly design it in my head until I could feel it with my mind surrounding me. And I would put this up and take it down every night. Eventually it got to the point where I didn't need layers that were designed to do excruciating things to spirits that decided to cross it, because it felt like just the aura of no fuck you was enough. I'm not saying that you should necessarily try to get there, but that's where I wound up, was just like the no fuck you was enough without needing the additional layers of acid and electricity and what have you. But it used to be funny because one of my students, actually one of my oldest students, we've known each other for 22 years now, and I used to actually draw out these on graph paper and label all of the horrible layers that would do this or that to things. And it was a fun game, and it turned something that was really scary into something I felt like I had control over. And in feeling like I had control, it seemed as though I did have control. So there's the no fuck you bubble.
I have one that I've used before, which boils down to, if you can touch me, I can touch you.
I've seen that one.
Which is you're gonna reach out and touch me. That means I could reach out and grab you and harm you. So let's go. Which generally is enough of a surprise.
Let's see, we did the Venus flytrap method there for a while.
Yeah.
Which was, if something brushed against us, we drew it into our personal universe, our personal, we are the god here, we set the rules here. And the issue I ran into with that one was I often learned, it felt like I learned more about the spirit than I really necessarily wanted to. In drawing it into myself.
Yeah, I'm gonna pop culture reference. This encountered a bit of the Will Graham problem.
Love you so much. Don't leave me hanging.
Which, for those of you who have not watched Hannibal, is kind of amazing.
All trigger warnings.
All trigger warnings. Like, there's a reason that Hannibal being Hannibal is one of the warning tags for the fic.
It's my second favorite TV show, and I watch it when I'm sick.
But in particular, when you bring something else entirely inside of yourself, then you understand it fully in the process of doing so, and sometimes that may not be a desirable side effect. The shit that you can wind up within your head gets a little disturbing.
Yeah. And I tried like shunting it into like an automatic disposal area, but even then it was inside me, and I tend to know things too well when they're inside me. So I ended up doing a shunt around me method, which I based on the Be a Rock in a Stream.
Oh, see, I did a variation on that involving gravity wells and levels.
Okay, so basically same
basic
principle.
Concept, though, yeah.
Where anything that attempts to touch you is just shunted around you and refused, and it goes off down the river, or in your case, into a black hole, which says a lot about the differences between us as people, I think.
I agree, that's why I'm laughing. Yours is, nope, just not here. Mine is, no and fuck you.
I went through that stage in high school with the no fuck you bubble. Okay.
So it's, here's the thing. I
do agree with you.
I do agree with you. And I've read some of those fics, including some of the ones I've seen you recommend. And I don't disagree that conceptually the idea of being able to partition, being able to shield your own mind is useful. But once you have actively brought something in, even if you have it in sort of a contained subunit,
which is what I was doing.
It's still...
But I've had students who could pull things in and put them in a contained subunit and not pick up anything from
Okay,
it.
that's fair.
Like,
so it may work better for some people
the
than
student
others.
that I'm literally talking about, we designed our no fuck you bubbles together on graph paper. That student is able to entrap things in their mind and not pick up anything. Basically just keep something contained in the white room from hell. Which, yes, that should sound like it has capitals.
Capital letters.
A little bit of a sadistic streak in this student. The white room from hell is kind of like the rooms. Have any of you ever seen the movie The Cube? So it's a horror movie. It's a sci-fi horror movie.
It's awful.
It's awful.
Like, it's actively terrible.
But the white room from hell in this student's mind is based off the rooms from the horror film The Cube.
I think I know who you're talking about, and that makes a disturbing level of sense.
And so basically they would do the Venus flytrap method, where anything that touched them would get sucked into this horrible room, and it would just rotate the terrible things it was doing to this spirit. Like the no fuck you bubble, but worse, because they couldn't just decide they can't leave, they can't run away. Yeah, very much, I'm not trapped in here with you, you're trapped in here with me. Anyway, I never mastered the ability to pull something through my brain without understanding it, and unfortunately in many cases understanding brings compassion, and my inconvenient compassion would mean that I could no longer torture the thing with impunity.
See, my issue is the way that I have my mind set up at this time. In order for something to be in it, I either must understand it or I must be dissecting it for understanding. I don't like having unexamined things in my mind.
Okay, fair enough.
Which means that as a side effect, I haven't created spaces that are immune to that, because I know myself well enough to know that if I do, I'll probably start shunting behaviors into those spaces.
I like that method, Lydia.
I like that idea.
I think of it like oil and water, cannot mix but in the same unit.
So I may have to revisit that and see if I can come up with a different mental construction that will be effective.
So other methods that I use are I simply refuse method that I learned from my great grandmother, and it took me something on the order of 22 years to master. Where you essentially just say, no, no, I refuse, no, I won't. And you don't get angry and you don't fight back, you just are not moved. And it worked entirely for protecting my body. I was no longer waking with bruises or cuts, but it didn't protect my clothing at all, which we actually found out in this house. We moved in and I started feeling something messing with my dreams, and I would just be like, no, I refuse. And it would stop. But I would wake up and there would be this horrible cut in my clothing. Like it had sheared it with a knife. I have a stack of clothing and I have to figure out if it's repairable. And then always on the back of my outfit or on the portion that covered my genitals. But I would sleep through it because I had refused its attention upon my person. And unlike when I was a child and I would wake up covered in bruises and cuts, there were no bruises and cuts. But what I ended up doing was banishing everything out of the house and letting things in one by one as they agreed to follow certain rules.
Right.
Which ended up revealing that the house itself has a bit of a gigantic spirit and intellect and intelligence, which I didn't banish, but I made some promises to.
Yeah.
We'll get along just fine as long as I keep my word and it keeps its.
This brings about sort of the other thing that I wanted to touch on in this topic, which is energetic methods of banishing. There are tool-based methods of banishing.
Ringing bells, non-Tibetan singing bowls, because apparently those are
Not
not Tibetan.
But cleansing with sound.
Cleansing with sound.
Cleansing with smoke from a variety of different things. Side note, please don't use white sage.
Cleansing by eating or drinking certain things, or by bathing in certain things. There are repellents and cleansing things that you can bathe in. I think that we may pick up with that next week if no one has any protests. Things that you ingest or wash with to repel or banish spirits.
Yeah, that would be fun.
Okay.
And then you've also got non-tool based methods. The best well-known of these is probably the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram, made famous in every introductory ceremonial magic and or Kabbalistic text.
Except it's not from Kabbalah.
I am aware of that.
But it's in the intro to Kabbalah.
I know. Which is interesting because, as written, it has been shoehorned into being an invocation of both your. Well, okay. Back up, rewind.
How hard can I roll my eyes? It's not that this doesn't work, and it's not that it isn't appropriate to certain schools of thought. It's that you find it ascribed to various traditions it didn't come from, and recommended to people of various traditions that it doesn't work with.
So what you have in the canonical version.
Did that hurt?
Yes. Is you start with something called the Kabbalistic Cross, which is not actually right, but is based on the Kabbalistic way of getting to the idea of being infinite and one with the universe, so fun. Which is basically get yourself into the right headspace where you are infinite. And then perform a ritual that requires that you call on powers that are larger than you, because you are now making yourself finite at the same time. And while being infinite and finite at the same time is a very useful exercise for some things, I think that they didn't think this through with the canonical version of the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram. Anyway.
Just calling out the ancient magicians.
not that fucking ancient. Involves the combination of the use of your own personal power and the power of a specific banishing sigil, for want of a better term, and the power of invocation of Yahweh and archangels thereof, for banishment,
My personal
all in
opinion.
this interesting mashup, which I find illustrative, not only because it is commonly taught, but because it does actually demonstrate here's how you can combine the use of your personal power with the use of invoking something outside of yourself with the use of a set ritual, which means it is a handy framework. If you are going to use it, I highly recommend you do what I did and you rewrite the fucking thing so that you're invoking a power that you actually like have a working relationship.
But that bothered you so much when you saw the comedic version done by that one coven in Vegas, that they had rewritten it to use the Egyptian deities.
It bothered me because they didn't rewrite it to use the Egyptian deities. They just swapped out the names of archangels for names of Egyptian deities that don't correspond to those fucking archangels.
Okay. And then they still use the pentacle.
And then they still use the pentacle, which had the wrong symbolic associations, and...
Alright, so it was sloppily done. You don't disagree with the concept.
I don't disagree with the concept of taking a ritualized framework and stripping out the symbolism and associated additional powers for ones that work for you and work coherently together. I do disagree with the idea that you can copy-paste names of deities over names of archangels and have everything be fine.
Okay, actually I agree with you on all of those salient points.
So, go ahead.
Okay, so I tend not to use complicated arm movements right up until I do, which tend to be related to martial arts and dance.
Yeah.
But I wanted to touch on that because I realized that I had kind of unintentionally either misled myself and therefore misled my students, or misled only my students, and I'm not sure which. Because I have said before that I tend to eschew overcomplicated gestures when it comes to using magic. This isn't accurate when I include the fact that I use both the creation of music and martial arts in order to get myself into the proper framework for magic, which does actually involve complicated gestures. Whether you're looking at my practice of Qigong, or whether you're looking at Tai Chi, or whether you're looking at my Escrima de Labios, there is a lot of complicated arm movements that I have incorporated into building myself up into a particular version of myself before I use a simple gesture where I'm like, no, fuck you. And then I kind of left that out. So this is me sort of bringing it back in, where I spend a lot of time doing things like martial arts, like playing the piano or the harp, although I haven't had a harp in several years. I'm looking to rectify that. In order to get myself into the appropriate state of mind to refuse something's attention. And then I use very simple gestures like the no, or the no and also let me just throw you away, or let me redirect you around myself. And those aren't banishing rituals of the pentagram.
Right.
But they're absolutely a banishing ritual that involves a physical gesture and an energetic gesture.
Yeah. Actually, thinking about it, a lot of traditional banishing rituals have a physical focus. It's just your body.
Yeah.
Your body is the focus.
Okay.
I do this by relying on my particular mindset of energy is energy is energy, and energy can be made to change its form. And so if there's something in the made of energy in the house,
just pet that goatee.
And you
need to like pet the goatee and get the glasses flash. Oh. Yes. Very evil. Okay.
No, so if you one of the easiest ways to release energy on a physical level is to light something on fire.
It's true.
Where you're essentially taking the energy contained within the physical bonds and through a cascading exothermic reaction causing it to be released as heat and light.
Yes.
And at which point it loses structural coherence and is no longer what it used to be because it is now, ash and heat and light. It's comparable. You're essentially taking the energetic form of something and introducing a loosely equivalent cascading exothermic reaction via a slight increase to the level of entropy within the energetic form, causing it to lose coherence and not be what it was anymore because it's essentially random free-floating energy, occasionally in the form of heat and or light, but also occasionally just in the form of like a burst of energy. And it turns out that you can use the energy that's omnipresent in the room, for example, as your rough analog of spark to tinder to cause the spike. So this is what I refer to as a burning. And basically it's where you use the ambient energy in the room to set all of the energetic constructs and or entities in the room on fire at a really high rate. Like they burn very fast. Yeah, it tends to be pretty effective. And the difficulty is actually more in conceptualizing what you want to have happen than in long-term focus and effort will. Which means that if you practice it as just a quick, then it can be really effective. You were going to talk about
there is a technique.
That one.
There is a technique that I learned from watching 90s and early 2000s cartoons.
I was going to say anime/cartoons.
Yes, which involves using mental control over myself to make myself very, very large on a spiritual level, and to then just pick up the tiny little annoying gnat and throw it away. And I used this technique as part of learning how to make myself both limitless and limited. Because I could make myself as large as I wanted to and still feel as though I had a limited consciousness. Or I could dissolve my consciousness and feel like a limitless being, but not a large being, because they're not necessarily the same thing. And it took me a while to learn to be limitless and feel large, and to feel limitless and feel small, and to feel limited and large, and to feel limited and small. And that's actually a dramatic oversimplification of the things that I play around with a variety of entheogens and meditative techniques. But cartoons are where I got the make myself really big and literally hold the thing that is assaulting me in the palm of my hand, where it is very small and easily smooshed. And I use that a lot on various annoying spirits. How's it going?
Well.
Yay. Okay.
Being able to pick something up by the scruff of the neck and drop kick it?
Basically.
Yeah.
I'm very short on Earth. Yen, do you mind? He's actually on a shorter chair than I am, but will you sit up straight?
Oh, geez. Okay, one sec.
My chair is a few inches taller than his chair in terms of the seat. Yeah, and I am sitting up straight. Ian is 6'5". I am 5 foot nothing. For our classes to work, he either has to slouch or sit on a different
I'm
kind of
currently
chair.
slouching on a shorter chair, and I'm still a little bit taller than you.
Yeah. In order just to get us both on camera.
Otherwise, you end up getting like Princess Bride level height differentials.
I am very short. And all my life, I have been very short, but I don't feel short. I never have. I don't feel short and I don't feel small. And this has allowed me to experience both knowing that I am short and small being and not feeling that, which has turned into a technique that I use in vanishing.